Bill English is in the Wellington studio with me. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you have to say? What is your response to what you've heard there from Mr. Dennis?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. We've never shied away from focusing on the toughest social issues, the longer-term deprivation, the hardship, and as he's pointed out, the exercise with Te Puia Marae and the combination with this benefit, with this particular grant, has meant that people who have found it very difficult in the system, and the system has found them very difficult, have started accessing support that they might otherwise not have been doing.
Okay, but does the government know what it's doing with these emergency housing grants when you've got this kind of a blowout?
Yes, I mean it's a demand-driven grant. If more people show up, then they get it. But I think the point here is there's at least as much. It's at least as much important to get the services around these families. These are families who mistrust the system. The system hasn't succeeded with them in the past. Most of them, from the work I've seen, will have had a long record of interaction with public services, and the interesting thing about this whole event is that Te Puia Marae, along with others, seem to have found a way of building their trust, starting to deal with some of the issues, even if it's going to take 5-10 years to actually deal with all of them. They've started dealing with that.
But you seriously underestimated this cost here and the extent of the problem, didn't you?
Well, look, the officials put up a number to start a system, and that's what they've done.
But what were they basing that on?
Well, you'd have to ask them. The much larger...
Well, no, but I'm asking you. You're the Prime Minister. You've also got previous skin in the game, particularly as a portfolio holder in this territory. So how was it that this was so extraordinarily underestimated?
Well, you have to see it in the context of a much larger package, which is $300 million over 4 years for emergency housing, because as Huramaina pointed out, the grant is very short term. So actually the spend on the emergency housing is much more significant. And in my view, the spend that really matters is the spend that's going to go on wrapping the services around those families to try and straighten them out.
But these are people who've been blacklisted in part, isn't it, from state houses, then also blacklisted by private landlords, and now they're being pushed from pillar to post between agencies. That's not exactly a success, is it?
Well, no, these lives are not successful. As you said, the mixture of family violence, criminal offending, drugs, who knows what else is going on in there. These are not successful lives, and everyone's trying to find their way and how to deal with it. The homelessness, in effect, just makes it clear that they have reached the end of the line.
So 2,600 families, do you have an assessment of how many individuals that is, how many people?
No, look, I can't tell you that.
Okay, so exactly what is the situation here? Because isn't this data, this hard data, actually a definition of a housing crisis?
I think it's a definition of crises for those families, of which housing is a part.
But not a housing crisis?
Well, I don't think housing crisis solves their problem. I mean, what needs to go on there and is what's coming into place is a provision of more emergency housing.
Having a steady roof over their heads, though, surely would be something that would probably increase the quality of their lives, wouldn't it, Prime Minister?
And that's what I'm explaining. So there's going to be a couple of thousand more social housing places in Auckland. There's, as I said, $300 million over 4 years for emergency housing, a significant part of that going on in Auckland. Probably more importantly is bringing in what was this very successful People's Project in Hamilton, to bring it into Auckland to deal with the people who are regarded as homeless and the system is regarded as homeless. But it turns out from Hamilton you can actually get them into homes if you deal with some of the issues, and they'll stay.
Just for this particular grant, you're now tracking towards $24 million for the year as opposed to $2 million, which was budgeted. So where's the money coming from?
Oh, well, look, it just comes out of the budget. I mean, as I said, it's a demand-driven thing. So if it's uncovering demand, that's good. It's bringing problems to the surface, makes it easier to deal with them, bearing in mind these are people who have often spent time keeping out of the system because they're concerned about their legal compliance, they're concerned about what might happen if the family shows up, they're concerned about their track records of debt and problems with landlords. So if this is a way of getting them up and out of up into the daylight, enabling someone to get to grips with their core social and family problems, then that's getting on with it.
That's a lot of money to come from somewhere, though, isn't it, that you hadn't budgeted for? Could be up to $22 million. So there's clearly some stuff that's going to miss out and isn't going to make the cut.
Look, you might have a slightly smaller surplus, but in the context of
So do
the
you think
large,
it will come off the surplus?
well, technically, yes, it will. But in the context of the large extra spend on social housing, the large extra spend, $300 million on emergency housing, it's not much.
Okay. While you're here, if we could talk to you also about New Zealand dairy farmers in Australia. Was this something specifically that was raised with Malcolm Turnbull when he was over last week? This was something that was discussed at all, was it? That they're not eligible for any kind of relief in the situation they're in?
We didn't specifically discuss dairy farmers. We did discuss, though, the significant progress been made on this issue about Kiwis in Australia, and that is the path to citizenship, which starts on, I think, 1st of July this year. Around 70,000 people are probably eligible for becoming Australian citizens and therefore picking up all the entitlements. So that's quite a big step forward. The Australian government has also been a bit flexible about how to refine that for some particular groups. I can't tell you whether the dairy farming thing has actually been addressed. Bearing in mind, dairy prices have been down; they're coming back up. Hopefully, these people will be through this very tight situation as prices rise.
So these New Zealand farmers are not able to access the $500 a week that the Australian farmers are in exactly the same circumstance. Is this something that you think should be looked at specifically now? And what exactly can New Zealand do for these people if it's not going to be?
Well, look, in the first place, Australian government policy. So we could raise it with them. Secondly, if they're in New Zealand,
will you raise it?
If they're in New Zealand, they probably wouldn't get $500 a week. I mean, our dairy farmers have just been through a big price downturn. They didn't get $500 a week. And I'm sure the Australian government would raise that with us, that we're arguing that they should get a subsidy in Australia but not New Zealand. Look, these people have been in a difficult situation. We're happy to argue for them if there's some real hardship. If it's just a downturn, well, they've gone to Australia, they're farming in Australia, they've chosen that, and we would expect New Zealand farmers in New Zealand to get through a downturn.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming into the studio as well. That's the Prime Minister, Bill English. It's 7:54.